Hello, I'm Heather Winn. I recently completed a master's of library and information science, and for my required practicum, I decided to do a project with VCU Special Collections, where I was researching queer comics history, and then I made a whole research paper. I put together a little libguide for the library website, and I also created a zine about what I'd learned to share with the students, and you can find that either at my table or at the library's table in the main area. Okay. So, I knew I really wanted to read all of the cool comics in the special collections. So I was putting together how can I make this into a research project. And then of course, and then I had to kind of scale back a lot because originally I was going to be like going through the entire collection to look for gaps in the history to like see what we could fill in. And then my teacher was like, that's too much to do in one semester. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do a research paper. And I was also limiting my scope to American comics because I knew if I got into like manga or like I don't even know anything about like Franco-Belgian comics. So it was all about American comics. That's also kind of what the majority of the holdings in the special collections are. So I was using the digital library access I had through the University of Maryland and doing a lot of reading of digital resources to sort of figure out which physical comics I needed to check out because just like scrolling through like the comics master list isn't very helpful. And then a lot of the stuff in the special collections is not on the comics master list. It's on like a separate comics master list that the public doesn't have access to. And like I had access to that, but even that was a little limited. So like figuring out like what other people had written about the history and like other people's primers on stuff and then being able to then go to the source and find like these primary comics within the collection. Yeah, so if you want to do that kind of research, I would suggest figuring out very specifically kind of what kind of comics you're looking for, like dates or authors or series by like doing outside research, and then specifically like asking a librarian how to find it because sometimes it's going to be filed in the catalog, and sometimes it's going to be on the master list, and sometimes it's going to be on like the spreadsheet that hasn't been updated. And with the zine collection, the zines aren't cataloged, so you just have to like ask for the zines and just like kind of go through them. Okay, so when I was researching the history of comics, so this is just the history of like regular comics, right? So we start getting like popular newspaper comics all the way back in like 1895. Then we start getting the floppy comics that like people know and love in the 30s, and they're mostly like funny animal like Donald Duck stuff until you get superhero comics. And then after World War II, everyone's depressed, and we get a lot of romance and crime comics. And that's also when the first explicitly gay comics that are published they're from Tom of Finland, who draws these sexy leather men all the time. And so those are the oldest like explicitly gay comics we could find. And when I say explicit, I do mean that they were sexually explicit stuff that this guy was putting out. Yeah, and then I mean honestly, I think there might be some so there are like these self-published little booklets called Tijuana Bibles that people would get the newspapers to print because it's cheaper for newspapers to keep running overnight than to turn them off and turn them on again. So you could just bring your Popeye porn to the newspaper and tell them to print it and they would. So if you were looking at like that kind of like super underground stuff, you might be able to find other stuff, but this is kind of what the history is showing. So yeah, everything got more complex and sexual, and then this psychologist named Frederick Wortham publishes this book called Seduction of the Innocent about how comics are corrupting our children. And that doesn't go very well for comics. Then they start having to be approved by the Comics Code Authority. Technically, you didn't need to be approved to sell. It's just that people were less likely to buy them or to want to sell your comics. Um, so then you get the like punk DIY, like underground scene, they don't care about the comics code. They're selling like directly to weird comic book stores. If you're Robert Crumb, you're pushing around your comics in a baby stroller and like handing them to people on the street. Like you're just like a weird stoner and like he gets to be on welfare because it's the 70s, so he doesn't even need a job. He can just do that all day. Uh Yeah, yeah. So yeah, our Crumb, his politics are really weird, but he's very pro weed and very pro welfare because that's what his whole life was like in the 70s. Yeah, so the comics code starts to slowly lose power because, people are like, why do we don't even care about comics anymore. It's the 90s. Comics aren't even good anymore, I guess. Like, no. I mean, yeah, but like people are like less big into censorship, and like that's when you start getting more complex themes like in mainstream comics. Right. So then, of course, like as soon as the internet starts allowing people to upload images, you're going to get webcomics. And manga becomes really huge as soon as those start being imported and translated, which also kind of leads into graphic novel publishing also becoming bigger in the US. And then we reach where we are now, which is where we have a lot of like really cool comics and graphic novels, although most of the comics are still published for like middle grade and like YA audiences because even though like Europe is all about comics for adults, it's like the US is like, no, those are still for kids. We don't want to give you money to publish those because you can't prove that adults read comics. And if you want to prove that by publishing comics, we won't let you publish them. So,
Yeah.
okay, so like the earliest comic that people are like reading as queer is Lucy and Sophie Say Goodbye in 1905, which is about these two women, and at every strip, they're like, "Oh, goodbye, goodbye." Like they take like 20 panels to say goodbye. They're like kissing each other goodbye in the street. Everyone's like, "Break it up already, like say goodbye." And then Crazy Cat. Crazy Cat is really interesting because Crazy Cat sort of there's like a lot of interesting gender stuff where it's like there's like sort of some of the comics talk about like not really being like a woman or like not being a man and like there's sort of like an interesting love triangle going on. And then it's also kind of complicated by the author of Crazy Cat was actually like mixed like African American, but he was passing. He like just wore a hat and told people he was Italian. But you can kind of see like the way he's engaging with like that part of his identity with like these kind of fluid characters. And then in Terry and the Pirates, which is like this big adventure comic in the newspapers, there's this character named Sanjak, and she's like kind of a lesbian, like a predatory lesbian stereotype. Like she's so handsome and she's like kidnapping this woman and like Terry has to save her, right? And Sanjak's like, I have an evil accent and and I'm going to hold you captive because
Sent like yourself. It's a comic.
it's spelled out phonetically.
Wow.
Like this is my evil plan. So she's not like great lesbian representation, but if you look in the archive, there's actually a letter to the editor where a woman is written in. Actually, I would want to stay with Sanjak, please. Like I wouldn't want to be rescued. I'd want to stay with Sanjak. She's so hot, So that's really fun. And then there's Hank O'Hare here from the Barbara Star. She's like a female reporter. So this is like her other female reporter who works in the same office as her, whose name is Hank, and she's like kind of like the mask reporter. So like a lot of people, like she's like kind of butch with it. A lot of people are reading her as lesbian. The author's like, having to put in the newspaper like, no, she's not a lesbian. I can't condone everyone calling her a lesbian. And then she ends up unfortunately getting written to marry a man. But that's kind of the way things were at the time. If you like actually look at what the author like says about her, it's like kind of clear that she had like lesbian friends that Hank is like very inspired by, but she can't put in like the like 30s 40s newspaper that this woman is a lesbian. Like I've got the impression that she was kind of pressured into making her marry a man. So, okay, and then The Advocate is a gay magazine and they have like newspaper sections. So that's in 1967. So that's when you have like an actual space for gay comics. And then the first lesbian comic is in the anthology series Gay Comics, and it's called, or maybe it was in Women's Comics. I'm not remembering right now, but it's called Sandy Comes Out. It's a pretty funny story. It's about a woman who's like she's like, maybe I should become a lesbian for feminism reasons. And then she gets laid and she's like, I don't care about women's lib anymore. I just want to have lesbian sex all the time. But that one wasn't by a lesbian. It was by a straight woman based on the experiences of a lesbian she knew. So after that comes out, all of the other lesbian cartoonists are like, that can't be the first lesbian comic. That's like not even what being a lesbian's like. Like I need to write my own lesbian comic because I'm so mad at this other comic book. So then the first lesbian comic by a lesbian is Come Out Comics by Mary Wings, which is about her experience coming out as a lesbian. And that one is like a lot more kind of grounded and less of like a jokey comic. And it's like much more specifically about her own experiences.
Yeah. Um,
Okay, so the earliest gay comics anthology is called Gay Heartthrobs, and it's interesting because it's edited and created by Larry Fuller, who also invented like the first black superhero. So he's like super ahead of the curve, but like it's really hard as a black man in comics. So even though he's like doing this kind of groundbreaking work, like the idea of the gay comics anthology doesn't actually like really kick off until gay comics in 1980. Um, yeah, and then in the world of like newspaper comic strips, because yeah, in my research I was like trying to do like really broad stuff where I didn't want to just focus on like superhero comics or underground. I also wanted to include like comic strips. So the first explicitly gay comics strip in the newspaper, in Doonesbury, there's a gay character. Doonesbury's like the most left-wing newspaper comic. Like compared to other comics, it's not very left-wing, but compared to newspaper comics, it's like communist basically because newspaper comics tend to be like so much more right-wing. Oh, and then Rupert Kinnard's Cathartic Comics. This is one of the favorite things that I like found out about when I was doing this research. You can see the cover for the collection of Cathartic Comics here. It's called BB and the Diva. So BB is the brown bomber, and he's like a gay superhero. And then Diva is Touche Flambe, who's like an immortal lesbian vegan warrior. She's like extremely cool. Even though it's like superhero comics, it's like actually mostly all like gag strips. They're like extremely funny even now. It's I would definitely recommend checking that out from special collections if you can. I think it's pretty hard to find in print outside of the collection. Oh, and then Dave Cotter's I'm Me is the first explicitly transgender comic by an openly trans creator. So that's published in Gay Comics in 1982. That's about him coming out, Dave Cotter. Oh, and I also wanted to mention Meat Men. Meat Men is like, so Gay Comics is an anthology where they're like, we don't want this all to be about sex. We want this to be about the other aspects of gay life. Like we want to talk about like the other stuff we have going on. Meat Men is extremely explicit gay male erotica. Yeah, it's like kind of like the opposite of gay comics. And I feel like it's important looking at the history to have like kind of these two sides of what people are creating. And a lot of people were contributing to both. Like there are people who had like I actually Rupert Kinnard, I don't know if he put it in Meatmen, but he has like a really funny pen name that he used for when he was writing erotic comics actually, which is funny. So you have a lot of people doing kind of both at once. And all of Meatmen is in the special collection. So if you can withstand like what's gonna be in erotic comics from the 80s, like there's some content in there, but I do think it is like an interesting kind of reflection. Okay, then so in Black magazine, so this is like the Advocate is like a generic like kind of gay magazine, but then Black magazine is specifically like queer Black people, and then so they also have comic strips in that. And so when I was reading about sort of like a Black lesbian representation in comics, like that's like kind of one of the few spaces where like there's like Black lesbian representation, like first of all like at all, but also like that is not stereotypical, like that is actually sort of trying to explore those experiences. Yeah, and then the Lesbian Cartoonist Network in 1990. So you have like there's like a lot of like early 90s kind of lesbian cartoonists who like get their start in zines, and they're all kind of like working together and supporting each other. Um Doom Patrol is the I think Coagula is the first transgender superhero, so that's written by Rachel Pollack, who's a trans woman. So that's kind of when we're getting like mainstream like transgender representation in like because Doom Patrol is I don't remember now if it's I think it's DC. I think it's DC Comics.
big name.
Yeah, and then Doom Patrol also later gets taken over by Grant Morrison, who is non-binary. So like Doom Patrol, like kind of as a series, is like super connected to that. Um, yeah, and so yeah, even though the first gay newspaper comics like character was in 1977. Like I said, newspaper comics stay like super right wing. So, in for better or for worse, when it has like a character come out as gay in 1993, it like actually causes like a huge backlash for the author. She's like getting like piles and piles of hate mail, but she's like it's she's really supported by her editor and then also Gary Trudeau of Doonesbury. The Doonesbury guy's been making people mad with his newspaper strips for like decades at that point. So he's like calling her like, don't worry about it. They get mad at me all the time, you know? So it's like kind of interesting. It's like I read the strips and it's like the most basic gay coming out you can possibly imagine. It's like nothing controversial at all, but like the newspaper strips reaction because it like goes to everyone instead of just like indie comic shops or like people who are like kind of into the scene. It's like you open yourself up to like a lot more backlash. So, and then the other thing though in this interview with her, she says is that the people who are mad about it, they're mad from the jump, but the people who want to like support her, they're waiting to see how she handles the storyline. So she eventually gets like a lot of supportive letters like after the arc has been running in this because like obviously newspapers you get like one strip a day. It's like hard to tell where they're going with it. So she does eventually get more letters from supportive people.
Awesome.
Yeah, so the first black lesbian superheroine is in Cyberzone. So this is like a kind of an independently created like superhero comic. That was an interesting thing to learn about. We actually don't have that one in the special collections, but I did recommend them to buy it while I was there. So hopefully they'll be able to get their hands on Cyberzone. And then yeah, more trans comic representation starts to come out like post like 2000, like as we enter like the 21st century. So we have comics by like Gina Kamensky and then Dylan Edwards. Dylan Edwards is Transposes is like released around that time. So like even before the like so-called like trans tipping point, you still have like a lot of openly trans people like in comics like putting out these stories. Like they've been here for a long time. And then like back in like mainstream like superhero comics like Young Avengers in 2005 has a gay couple on the team. And then yeah, and then I added the timeline with Kevin Keller being the first gay character introduced to Archie because Archie is like this wholesome Americana, like one of the first comics to like adopt the Comics Code Authority like thing and put it on it. Like, oh my God, we're just like the cutest white teens ever. We don't do anything wrong. So like as soon as they introduce like a gay boy, it's like that's kind of I feel like the sign that like comics are like accepting like queerness in like a big way. I mean, Kevin Keller's introduction comic is so funny because Betty and Veronica are both like, "Who's this hot new guy?" And he's like, "Sorry, ladies, I'm gay." And they're like, "Oh my God, we're so allies. We love you, Kevin." Hmm. Oh yeah, so I wanted to share this quote because when I was doing the research, I was really into learning about Jennifer Camper. This is one of her comics that she made. So she's like saying, like this time and I mean also even now, like the comic scene is like super like white just because of sort of the resources you need to be producing comics. So she's a lot of her work is sort of talking about like how like race is intersects with like being a lesbian and like with queerness. So she says in this quote, but I also make comics about LGBTQ plus Arabs, and my Arab friends living in Arab countries presently have the same concerns about my characters making queers look bad. Creating evil or flawed queer characters is a privilege that comes only with having many opportunities for stories about multitudes of LGBTQ plus experiences. So that's kind of like what her work is trying to do is like she wants there to be room for all of these stories and she's like likes to like make stories about people who are kind of messy, which like I super admire. I think her work is really interesting. Her work is collected in a book in the special collections called Sub Girls, and then I think she also has another collection called Rude Girls and Dangerous Women. So if you wanted to look at her work. So these are the books that I use to do my research. So it's the LGBTQ Comic Studies Reader, which I read digitally. I think the library here might have a physical version and let you access it digitally. And then I read the physical version of No Straight Lines, which is like a really good book that has like a lot of excerpts of like different queer comics. So a lot of the stuff that I took pictures of, honestly, for this project was actually like little excerpts that were in No Straight Lines. And that one also was like, I think, produced a documentary in collaboration with PBS. So I think Rupert Kinnard is interviewed in that documentary along with a lot of other cartoonists. So that's something interesting to like check out if that's something you're interested in. And then if you notice, like a lot of my stuff was about lesbianism. Part of that is because a lot of queer history focuses on gay men, but the other part was that the Journal of Lesbian Studies had an entire volume that was all articles about lesbians in comics, specifically, like their comics special issue. And I just used a lot of that writing for my project. And that one I accessed digitally. Oh, and yeah, this is the Sandy comes out comic where she's like, "Oh, do I need to become a lesbian about it?" Oh, and then even though my project was focused on American comics, I did want to put in here at the end some resources if you were interested in sort of like the Asian history. There's this really good talk on YouTube called Boys Love: The History and Transformation of BL in Asia. It's not just talking about manga, it also is talking a lot about BL dramas. It's actually how I found out there's like a huge they like produce like a lot of BL dramas in like Thailand, like a crazy amount. And then I had also read recently this year By Your Side, the first 100 years of Yuri anime and manga, and thought that was like a really good introduction to sort of like what Yuri is as a genre. Oh, and I also wanted to recommend Our Dreams at Dusk because that's like my favorite kind of LGBTQ manga that I think is like super cool. Uh, here's just some other images that I thought were fun from when I was doing my research. Forget about gay rights, baby, and kiss me. Here's another comic that I thought was really cool while I was doing my research. Rex Mason, boy transvestite. Um, this one, it's like fun if you can like get a chance to like just check out like a bunch of comics from that era that are like anthologies and like look through them and see what's in there because like there's gonna be some misses, but there's also gonna be like some of the coolest stuff that you've seen. So this one I really like the style of. Okay, and then that's the end of my talk. So, I can take some questions now if anyone has any.
How did you get into this like research in the first place?
Okay, so, I got into sort of, let's see, I was always into comics, but then I got really into web comics.
Mhm.
And I followed Carta Monir on Twitter, and she's like a comics artist. She isn't a web comics artist, but except I mean she had like a comic that was published through Polygon, I think, and like Medium. So I kind of came across her work, and then she started posting about like Meat Men, I think. And I was like, I was going to VCU at the time, and I was like, does VCU have Meat Men? And it turned out they did. So I was like, wait, I could just like go look at this. Like, so just kind of like realizing that like the history of comics was like accessible to me through VCU because with a lot of comics history, it's like because comics are like so cheaply printed and like often like aren't reprinted, it like people like forget the history very easily. Like there's like different generations of comics that aren't like really in conversation with like past generations of comics, but like so I really wanted to like kind of go back and be able to see like where the current continuity of comics like is coming from, like what kind of work are other people doing, because a lot of these cartoonists are still living and they're still making work, but because they're from like this other generation, it's like they're not as in line, or like they don't have like the energy to get out to these events anymore. Like Jennifer Camper was like organizing a huge amount of comics events because she was big into community for a long time, but then post COVID she hasn't been doing that anymore. So um, yeah, just like I mean, I'm also just like a huge comics fan, so like being able to kind of like find things that are like relevant to me like historically, I just think it's like very interesting, especially when it's like works that I know I like wouldn't be able to read except in like terrible scans if I didn't have access to them through the collections.
Yeah, the special collections is really impressive, but you really gotta know where to look. Gee, Heather, where would I start researching? What would you like? How do you recommend navigating the special collections? Honestly.
I would say it depends on whether you have a specific idea of what you're looking for or not. I think like typing in like words related to kind of what you're looking for and like seeing if you can find any sort of like papers or like references to like stuff that would be related to that. Or like if you already know like what titles you're looking for, like you can just come in and like, or you can like, email the special collections and be like, I'd like you to pull these for me for this time, and then make that appointment and just come in and they'll be like, here's 8 volumes of Meat Men, and you're like, don't think I'm a pervert. but I think probably the easiest thing to do if you don't really have a strong idea of what you want to look at, but you know that you want to see something cool, is to just talk to a librarian and like be like, here's the like topics I'm interested in. Do you know anything related to this? And like the librarians have like a very good grasp of the collection and they should be able to like sort of point you to things that are related to you. They should be able to like go into the stacks and pull like, like 10 things that are like, will any of these work? And then like they'll show them to you at your appointment. And you can be like, oh, well, I liked this thing. And I like, is there more like that? And then I'm not really interested in this other thing. And you can sort of do that work to like narrow down how to find the stuff that's like you're going to really connect with.
Yeah. Yeah, please utilize the special collections if you are a student.
You can still use them. The public
My
can make
goodness.
appointments with special collections.
Regardless of that you go here. While you're here, you go. Heather, I want to learn about early webcomics. It's kind of crazy that, like, basically, as soon as the internet was like conceived, people were just like, "Oh my God, I can use this as a tool to put my comics out there."
Yeah, and it's really interesting because early web comics are like way more inspired by like newspaper strips. They're like basically all like gag comics about like two dudes on a couch talking about video games. Like that's that's basically where most of them are starting. But you can see sort of a shift as well, like the first shift is like people start getting really into manga and they want to make their own manga, like their own American manga. So you get like Mega Tokyo, like stuff that's like super like anime inspired.
It's really fun.
You also get furry web comics pretty soon, you know? Although some of those are still like a gag strip kind of thing. There's one I think that's about like roommates, but they're just like furry gay roommates.
Oh, that's so
And
fun.
then you get as soon as like people like we have like more of like a graphic novel market and also as drawing tablets become more affordable because a lot of these original strips are like people like scanning or taking bad photos of like their actual drawings of like but as soon as you can like make comics digitally, like people start to like make digital comics and they start and then also professional artists realize that they can use them for their portfolios to make comics on the internet. So you get like suddenly an influx of like professional level looking like graphic novel type web comics that like kind of totally changes the scene.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Professional job working in the industry, so time is so like used webcomics as like a launching pad into the animation industry.
Yeah, it used to be, I wouldn't say exactly that it was easier to monetize webcomics, but back when people like it was like more common in internet culture to like bookmark websites and to like have an RSS reader and like I guess share websites around with friends. And then there was also like so like a lot of the early webcomic artists just like built a huge audience like during that period where there aren't a lot of comics and then they also are like they have like a PayPal tip jar or like there's a an ad service that no longer exists called Project Wonderful that would run ads on web comics. The top web comics used to be a much bigger thing. If you like go look at a bunch of early web comics now, they'll still have a thing that's like vote for me on top web comics because it used to be like that's how people found each other. So a lot of like the long running web comics are people who built huge audiences in like 2003 and those people are just like still supporting them and that's why they're able to continue making it work without like transitioning to like a traditional publishing.
Yeah, it's very like the it used to be like the Wild West, isn't it? Now the internet feels like so hostile. It's very,
Yeah.
very interesting to see. shift.
Yeah, what's less that it's like even hostile towards comics, it's just like it's more aggressively trying to monetize comics. So like a lot of online comics now, it's like they're trying to convince you to host with Webtoons or host with Tapas or like one of these other services so like they get to like have partial rights to your work. Like they want to be able to like sell like the rights to adapt your work, that kind of thing, like trying to corral people versus like people having their own websites where they can
Mm.
kind of do their own things. And then of course with webtoons you also have a lot of censorship rules about like violence and sexual content, and a lot of the appeal of like webcomics is like you don't have those censors, and that's why there is like so many like queer webcomics, is because you could just make them about anything.
Yeah, it used to be where you could just like set up a WordPress and just like post your own site essentially. But these days, a lot of it's more curated towards like Webtoon and Pineworks. They actually take a huge percentage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting to see that shift. And there's a lot of censorship even these days that I couldn't imagine what it was like to be a queer artist 100 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's when you have to be like you have to be going to the newspaper and printing your secret comics for free at night and then just passing them out to people and leaving them in bus stations and doing a lot of actually early like zine and like comics culture is just like you used to be able to just share your address with people because they didn't have Google. They couldn't like Google where you lived and get maps to you, right? It was like way harder to like find someone with their address. You would just like mail things to them. So a lot of like early zine culture and like how like lesbian cartoonists and like gay people are like finding each other through comics is that they're like, hey, if you like my comic, write to me. It's like send me your comics. Like, so just like being able to like communicate through snail mail in that way.
Where can we read?
Oh, it isn't my paper I didn't publish. My LibGuide isn't on the library website yet either. But if you want to see my paper, you can email me and I will just email it to you. I haven't tried to submit it anywhere. So,
Yeah, I would love to check it out. I know you got a couple of zines from the special collections.
oh yeah, the zine I made for the special collections, that's like the only one of my actual products of my research that is like kind of physically actualized. Yep. So yeah, I mean, just if if any of you like want to talk to me about like cool comics to check out, or if you have like cool comics to recommend to me, just let me know. I'll be at my table, or you guys could email me, anything. All right.
All right. Thanks for being here, guys.